Well, I don't guess okay, we're on. Energy Utilities and Telecommunications, call the meeting to order. Appreciate members being here. Thank you. We have a measure to take a look at. Senate Bill 162, a substitute, has been brought to us by Representative Fleming. Chairman Fleming, there you are. And I recognize you're recognized to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 162 came out of the Senate, and Senator Brass had been speaking with the short-term rental representatives at the Capitol, Airbnb and Expedia and other people who do that kind of work. And they asked him, would he consider allowing them to use Senate Bill 162 as basically a vehicle for something dealing with an issue that they were interested in. He told them that was fine, that he didn't mind that. So what you have in front of you is not obviously the original SB 162, but simply a code section that would add some language to our state code regarding short-term rentals. There is a dispute, just to put it that way, between some local governments around the state and those companies that deal with short-term rentals, and most commonly, many of you know them as Airbnb or Expedia that offers that. And the fear is that some local governments would go so far in their regulation of those industries that they would actually put them out of business completely. I thought it was unreasonable to put somebody out of business trying to do that kind of work. However, I did think that some regulation would be reasonable. The example, Mr. Chairman, that has been used quite often is in the city of Savannah. They have an awful lot of tourism down there, obviously. They have residents that live in areas, particularly the historic district, where a lot of folks rent their houses out. And if you live next door to a house that becomes a hotel for that reason, you obviously would like some limitations on things like parking, events, and that go on late at night. So the city of Savannah does have a regulatory ordinance that puts some limitations on that. But also the accusation is from the people in this industry that there are some local governments, and this is disputed, but that there are some local governments that completely ban the short-term rentals. I'm of the opinion that you ought to be allowed to rent your property within some reason, and that is what the bill in front of you attempts to do. And it's not very complicated. It's only one run-on sentence there, written by some lawyer, I suspect. But it does say in the important part on line 15 that such regulations shall not completely prohibit all such occupancies or rentals within the local government's jurisdiction. In other words, basically a signal to the local governments in the state, we understand reasonable regulation of this, but don't go too far. So, Mr. Chairman, that is basically what the substitute does in front of you, and I would be happy to try to answer any questions from your members.
Okay. Looks like you have a couple questions. Representative Cantrell, Representative.
It's not letting. Oh, okay, I'm on. Chairman Fleming, obviously it's the first I've seen this, but the way it reads to me is it doesn't read reasonable. It reads they shall not completely prohibit. So they could prohibit to the tune of 99.9% and be in compliance with the language of this bill. And am I missing something?
Well, what does Georgia law say on this subject matter now would be my first question for you.
I don't know the answer to that.
The answer is there are no restrictions whatsoever on the local government's ability to regulate Airbnb or Expedia. So this is the beginning of a process. I would call it somewhat of a message to the local governments that don't go too far lest this legislature meet again and restrict you further.
Okay.
I would much rather us send a message to the local governments that there is a road too far, and some of you may be doing that. There are accusations that some local governments have completely banned this. And so what I'm trying to say to them, we understand that places like Savannah need some reasonable regulations on this because of neighborhoods, but we also don't want any local government to completely ban short-term rentals. I think short-term rentals is somewhat of a property right. When I own a piece of property within reason, I ought to be able to rent it. And I think in the future we may come back and address this again, but this is a beginning.
Okay, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Let's see, what? Representative Belton, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I live in a community that does prohibit this, and they would be very happy if we started to
No, he's on full
exercise
time.
our control of local control. We, as Republicans, keep on saying. we
No, he's
like
6.
local
He's on 6.
control. But, here we are.
I'm sorry, we're trying to get your turn. What mic are you speaking into? Okay.
It doesn't work. Maybe use Representative Cantrell's.
My community, thank you, Chairman, for the question. My community does prohibit rentals like this. I live in a neighborhood that does this, and I don't know why we keep on saying we're for local control, but then we keep on, as a state, controlling locals. So why we as a state need to come in there and tell these locals what they can and cannot do with their own county?
Well, can your locals open a gambling casino?
No, but they can control this.
So the point being that we do tell locals constantly there are limits you cannot go beyond, and this bill is intended to do that.
Okay, Representative Drenner.
My microphone doesn't work either. Can I just ask
Ba-
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry?
It doesn't work.
Well, take number 2 there.
That one doesn't work either.
I don't know. I don't
Wouldn't
know.
come on
Go
that
ahead,
one.
just go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I like you believe that property rights is your house. You should be able to do what you want to do with it. You know, up to a
Within
certain-
reason.
Within reason.
Yeah.
I was about to qualify that statement. My only question is that the jurisdictions that already have ordinances, does this usurp those?
No, because and I use Savannah as an example because they're so easy because of the tourist industry. They have a regulatory system set up that has been explained to me, although I haven't read it myself. For example, they limit the amount of short-term rentals in certain areas. In other words, we're going to allow it to here. When we get saturated, we're going to put a stop to it. This would not, in my opinion, nor the people with local governments I've talked to, stop them from the ordinances that they have. It would, however, as Representative Belton mentioned, his community does apparently, according to him, completely ban any short-term rentals. It would affect them. They would have to come up with a regulatory scheme like Savannah or somebody else where they could put restrictions on how, when, and where, and to what amount. But they just wouldn't say none here.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman? I was on the study committee for this, and I do remember that one of my very favorite places, the Ritz down on Lake Oconee, also has a similar situation where they've completely banned them. So that what you're saying is that they do have to come back now and
They actually haven't completely banned them. They allow them for the first 2 weeks in April.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There's a little golf tournament over in Augusta, and they like to let people stay there.
Representative Clark? Wait a minute, where's, okay. Representative Dixon?
I just wanted a little clarification, and I think I've gotten it, because it says less than 30 consecutive days. Correct?
Yes, ma'am. That's consistent with the innkeeper law that we currently have in the state, that if you rent more than that, if I'm not mistaken, and there are folks in the audience who can correct me, you automatically fall under an innkeeper law. Basically, you're a hotel at that point. So that's just consistent with current Georgia law.
Okay, so if I wanted to rent
And I'm looking out at my smart people out there. Did I say that right? Innkeeper law. Yeah.
Well, you okay, thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions I see. All right, this is a public meeting. If anybody would like to speak from the public, if you can just give a very concise, short, because we have to get back to the chamber before long. But you know, we want to make sure that you have a chance to express anything you want to say about the legislation. Anybody from the public? Looks like there is none. What's the will of the committee? Oh, you need to come to the mic. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry Ramsey with ACCG. Just a couple of comments. As Representative Drender said, there was a study committee on this that came up with no recommendations. It's a complex topic. We've got different jurisdictions dealing with this in different ways throughout the state. I would agree, as Chairman Fleming had said, I'm not aware of any local government, certainly no counties, that are completely prohibiting short-term rental of property. And that's so I don't, from that kind of policy perspective, don't see that as a problem. But this is part of a larger topic that has been studied. There are other issues, such as collection of hotel motel taxes. We have a bill in the House that did not pass out. This is from our perspective a topic that should be addressed more globally than in a bill that gets changed on day 38. Complex topic that we've been working with the industry on, working with GMA on, and working with the study committees on. 2 study committees in the last 4 years. We just suggest from that perspective, this is a topic that needs more time and more study. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Don't see any. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Let's see. Go ahead. Tell us who you are and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jim Sprouse, Executive Director for the Georgia Hotel and Lodging Association. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My comments will somewhat mirror the first speaker. It's a complex issue that deserves careful consideration for legislation. We've been involved in discussions on this particular topic for well before the start of the session. It's not a small business. There are a significant number of sales for short-term rentals in Georgia. A study based on AirDNA data showed $350 million in sales for 2018. We'd like to see some parity. Hotels have business licenses, certificate of occupancy, health inspections, fire safety inspections, pool safety, tourist accommodation permits, and more. They pay sales taxes, state and local, hotel taxes, special option taxes, and the $5 fee. I urge you to take careful consideration given to a business that's not currently regulated or paying taxes to the state or local governments. Thank you.
Thank you. See no questions.
Jeff Ledford with Georgia Realtors, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. This is a private property rights core, issue, and Chairman Fleming's right when he says that. However, it's also this particular issue before you is not the answer to the entire problem. That's not what this is attempting to do. This is attempting to fix a problem that has begun to arise that we are seeing from the realtor perspective when local governments are discussing the ban. And we're not talking about the regulations, and we're there for each one of those discussions when we hear about it so we can be part of that process. But the outright bans are affecting more than just what you think of with a short-term rental. When we are involved in a transaction and you sell your house and your new one's not ready yet, maybe you haven't closed yet or it's still being built or whatever else is going on, when the issue of banning short-term rental comes into these ordinances, that restricts what's called the lease back. So in other words, I need to rent my house back that I have been in. I've been in there 20 years, let's say, and I sold it to you, and you're going to lease it back to me for 2 weeks until my closing. And that way, everything happens, the closing's happened. We are seeing ordinances that the way they're written would restrict that and prevent that from happening. So in other words, I'd have to move out of county for 2 weeks and then come back in, stay at a hotel. This is also affecting when they're banned. It's not just the vacations, but it is when people are moving into a county, when they're moving into a city, and they want to explore what's out there. They want to see what a neighborhood's like, and they're essentially getting to try out what this town is like. When they are coming in for training at Fort Benning, when they are you know, everything from military to hospital stays. This is something where we're seeing the vast majority is used for that. And these bans are typically done because it's the quickest knee-jerk reaction you can have. That's all this is attempting to address for right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Belton, I know you have a question. I'm going to hold off until the other people testify. They may answer your question. That's the only reason I want to do that. Let's see. Kenyatta?
Good afternoon, Kenyatta Mitchell. I'm representing Expedia.
Callie Michael representing Airbnb.
So we want to address a few issues that were brought up, one of which was taxation. Taxation is a separate bill, so we didn't want to mix those two together. We actively have encouraged equal taxation with the hotel industry, so that should not be an issue here. What we're merely trying to do is we're trying to make sure that communities, as opposed to doing blanket bans, come and speak to us. So we have had some instances where counties and cities have said, because this legislation is pending, they're going to wait before they, decide to do blanket bans that will affect their constituencies. We are open for any questions, but we just wanted to make sure that y'all were aware of those too.
You do have a question. Representative Belton, did you want to ask your question? You do not? Yes, sir. Okay. Representative Nelson? Oh, Chuck. Go ahead and speak into that thing since we're being.
I wait right now, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question for later when you get past the testimony.
Okay.
I don't have a bunch of
All right, very good. Looks like no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have a substitute to Senate Bill 162 brought to us by the respected chairman of the Judiciary Committee. What's the will of the? Looks like we do have another.
I just had a quick question of the author, if I might.
Oh, okay. I think I'm.
That's what
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed it.
I won't belabor the pitch. Sorry, I was at Senate Rules, Mr. Chairman. That's the reason. And in 406 and then 506 before I got to 515. Chairman Fleming, as a practical matter, the point they just brought up about the sale and lease back, you're an attorney and I'm not, but wasn't there a Supreme Court case a number of years ago that was related to cities completely banning a particular activity or a particular type of business in there? You had to let it happen somewhere. You didn't. You could regulate it to its full extent. As a practical matter, isn't this somewhat mirroring what the Supreme Court said? Is you can't outright ban something without a due process?
I think there are probably some similarities with what your discussion. I believe what you're referring to is what do they call it, exotic dancing?
I didn't recall it in that particular sense, but
yeah, I recall it because over in Augusta, where a few of us live, this was an issue there. You cannot completely ban certain activities which are considered forms of speech because of the First Amendment. I think that there may be an analogous relationship with people banning things completely, but that was probably a First Amendment question. This is a property rights question. So an important concept, but nonetheless, I think the court rulings you're referring to deal with the First Amendment issue.
okay, and and this doesn't relate to places like there are families in Athens that have that may have relatives or students that they know that come and live with them to go to school there, and they may or may not charge them a stipend and so forth like that. We're not trying to impact that at all, correct?
So all we're impacting is rentals that are less than 30 consecutive days. When you go to school, you're going to be there a matter of months, and that's what we call landlord lease law,
Okay,
which
thank
is
you.
completely controlled under a different title.
Okay, see no further questions. Here again, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have a substitute to Senate Bill 162 brought to us by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I know he's put, whether it's day 3 or day 38, we're still in session and we still take up legislation. And I know that the chairman has put time into this and a lot of thought. This is not something that just came on the, the last minute or anything. So what is the will of the committee? We have a motion to do pass Senate Bill 162. Is there a second? There's a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, seeing no discussion. Don't believe Did you have? Okay. All in favor of Senate Bill, substitute Senate Bill 162, this is LC 412033S, indicate by saying aye. Any opposed by saying no? We have a due pass of Senate Bill 162 LC 412033S, and you can take it to rules. Thank you.